Welcome to church. This is a bit different, isn't it? Well, you now need your outline, which is still in that service sheet. So I encourage you to use the outline. You'll follow, help you follow where we're going, and there are pens there as well. You'll notice that there are fill in the blanks, and I'll tell you we're going to do that in a moment. But we're in this series. This is the second part of this series that we've been in. We started last week called Travelling Light. And what we're doing through this series is we're looking at some of the baggage, some of the sort of stuff that we carry in our lives. And the stuff that we carry, the sort of the baggage that we hold on to, very often damages our lives if we're not careful. So this morning we're going to be thinking about temptation. And you've probably picked that up by now, but we're thinking about this baggage of temptation, which can often damage us in many different ways. It can make us feel regretful. It can cause us all sorts of issues when we have to carry this ongoing challenge of maybe a temptation or different types of temptations, which we often fall into. Now, I don't know about you, but maybe you wake up in the morning and you think to yourself, right, this morning is going to be very different. This morning is going to be a good day, it's going to be a great day, and I'm going to be different. I'm not going to fall into the same old habits, the same old temptations that I've fallen into in the past. And you think that's what it is. But it never works out that way, does it? Sometimes you just fall back to your old habits, your old temptations, your old ways that you want to get past. And you might feel that there is this tug of war that goes on inside of you. You want to do the right thing. You want to do the good things. You want to do what is best. But the danger is that we fall back to doing the same old habits, the same old temptations, the same old problems that we hold on to. And we try our best, but we end up disappointing ourselves. We end up disappointing God. Nothing seems to work. Why is that? Why do we keep making the same mistakes over and over again? Why do we become resistant to change? Why do we do the things that we know that are bad for us? See, if we're honest, we've got to admit that at different times in our lives, we've all felt that way, that you end up doing not the right thing. And what we tend to do is we can get into this, what I call this cycle of failure. And what I mean by that is we do this. We start with good intentions, then there is action, then there's failure, and then it ends in guilt. And we do that again. Good intentions, action, failure, and then good, and then guilt. Good intentions, action, failure, and then guilt. I wonder how many times that you've tried to change something, some habit, some temptation that you get caught up in, and you fail at it over and over again. Now, why does that happen? Well, it happens because good intentions aren't good enough. It takes more than desire, it takes more than just good intentions to make those changes, to deal with those habits and hang-ups that we hold on to. And this morning we're going to look at really how we can deal with that. We're going to look at it in a deeper way than just, I want to do the right thing, good intentions. We're going to look at how do we break free from those persistent temptations, from those habits and hang-ups that really affect our lives. Now, I'm not talking about those temptations that are like those little things, like I shouldn't have that piece of chocolate cake, when it's offered to you, or that extra burger, that you might get offered today, you run away from those sorts of things. I'm not talking about that sort of stuff. I'm talking about those persistent temptations, those issues again and again and again that we give into and that we fall into, and they cause us problems. Maybe it's things that dominate our lives. Maybe things, for example, anger that just seems to be out of control. We know we shouldn't do it, but we become angry very easily, and then there's chaos and carnage all around us. Maybe fear. We talked a bit about this last week, but maybe fear causes us to panic and to worry about stuff. Maybe it's resentment. Maybe it's sexual thoughts. Maybe it's greed. Maybe it's jealousy. What are those persistent habits? What are those temptations that we fall into time and time again that we know we want to change? We know it'll be better for us if we do change, but how do we actually do that? Good intentions aren't good enough. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. Now, as I read in that reading, the Apostle Paul obviously felt exactly the same way that we do. This is what he says in Romans 7:15. You'll see it there on your outline. He says, I don't understand myself, for I really want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do the very thing I hate. How many of us could give testimony to that sort of thing? Very easily we fall into these things, don't we? And as you read through the New Testament, what you read is that you find that there are certain patterns, there are certain things that we can be aware of, that we can avoid if we're actually going to deal with this issue of persistent temptation. So this morning, what I'm going to do is I'm going to summarise in 6 different steps how we can deal with some of these persistent temptations that we fall into. Now, you are going to need to listen this morning, because you might have noticed that there's no PowerPoint up here to fill in the blanks. I did ask Sarah, my loving wife, if she would stand up here holding up the words, but she wasn't buying it. You know, like you see, like the wrestling and the boxing, and those ladies go, no, all right, that definitely shouldn't have happened anyway. But so you're going to have to listen, okay, as we go through this together, all right? So you've got pens, follow with me. Here's the first step. First of all, is know your pattern of temptation. That's the first thing. Know your pattern of temptation. What do I mean by that? I mean this. There are certain things that affect you more than others. We all have the same temptations, but they come at us in different ways depending on our personality or our background or a lot of other things. So you have a unique weakness to certain temptations. There are certain things that you will fail at which other people won't be so concerned about. So therefore you need to know the pattern of your temptation. Because for certain the devil knows. He knows what uniquely will trip you up. He knows better than you do. So you better know what will trip you up, what your weaknesses are, what your temptations are, because the devil will do that. He will use those against you. Because if you don't know what these are, you almost are walking through life with a blindfold on. Every day the devil is trying to trip you up in some way, trying to mess you up. And if you don't know what weakens you, what tempts you, if you don't know how and when it happens and what's going to take place, then you're literally just driving along up a blind alley. You're going to be putty in the hands of the devil, because he knows what will tempt you, and you ought to know these things. Look at Proverbs 5 verse 6 there. It says, the immoral person does not care about the path of life. She staggers down a crooked trail and doesn't even realise where it ends. If you don't know the pattern of your temptation, you will travel down certain roads, down certain paths, not realising that you're heading for destruction. You're heading for disaster. You're heading for a crash. That's why Lamentations 3 verse 40 says, let's take a good look at the way we're living and reorder our lives under God. If you can identify the patterns that tempt you, the weaknesses and the habits that you give into, if you can predict those problems in advance, you can avoid those situations. You need to know your pattern of temptation, how Satan will hook you, because he certainly knows. Number 2, second step, plan to avoid the temptation. Plan to avoid the temptation. Now, this ain't rocket science, is it? Let's be honest about this. Once you know the patterns that tend to cause you to give in to temptation, then you can begin to avoid those patterns. So once you know the triggers, then you set some boundaries in your life that stop you falling or giving into those situations, or even putting yourself in those situations. In other words, if you don't want to get stung, stay away from the bees. Proverbs 4, 26 to 27 says, plan carefully what you do, avoid evil and walk straight ahead. Don't go one step off the right way. Keep your eyes focused. Don't get distracted, in other words. So we need to understand how we deal with the natural desires in our life. So for example, there are many things in our life that are natural desires, which are good things. It's just how we use them. So for example, sex is a natural desire. Where do you think you got your sex drive from? God created us as sexual beings to have a sexual desire to be enjoyed in marriage. It is a gift from God. The problem is, though, is that so many of us, and so many people today, misuse that, pervert that, change that, do it outside of the way that God created and ordained, and then they end up with all sorts of problems. There are lots of things that are good desires that we use in a destructive way. So the problem is that they come in and we get caught up with these desires and we begin to look at them differently, and then what they do is it takes a very natural routine desire and we turn it into a runaway desire. And all of a sudden, it's all you can think about. It possesses your mind, it becomes more important than anything else, and then it becomes destructive. Then it causes you problems. So a fire in the fireplace can warm your house, but a fire out of control in your house will burn it down. And it's just what you do with it that makes the difference. So we need to avoid the temptations that come up in our lives. We need to understand that God wants us to build boundaries in our lives. And once you know the patterns, once you know where you're failing, you say, I will not put myself in this situation. I will not put myself in a place where I can be tempted with this weakness that I know is my problem. That's just being smart, isn't it? Step number 3. I must protect the condition of my heart. So I must, number 3, protect the condition of my heart. Look at Proverbs 4:23. It says this: above all else, guard your heart, for it affects everything you do. You might want to circle that on that outline there, those words, guard your heart. Because that's the key here. If you want to change something that is continually causing you to stumble, you don't start with your behaviour, you start with the heart. You start inside of you. Because you can't change your behaviour by sheer willpower. You might do it for a little while, but you won't do it. You might be saying to yourself, I'm not going to do this anymore, I'm not going to do this anymore, I'm not going to do this anymore. And then eventually you give in, don't you? Willpower doesn't work. It doesn't help us get over some of those temptations that we always fail at and always fall into. And the danger is, what we do is we eventually give up because we get tired, we get stressed about it, we don't feel that there's any change whatsoever, and then the result is that you just are constantly thinking about the thing that you don't want to think about, because you're saying by willpower, I won't do this, and then you're always thinking about it. And then you give up. If you want to change a persistent pattern in your life that you don't like about you, you don't focus on the behaviour, you don't even focus on the circumstances, you don't even focus on the temptation, you don't even focus on how you feel. You focus on what is going on inside your heart. What is going on inside of my heart that makes me want to do this? In other words, you almost give yourself a spiritual x-ray. You do a heart examination. Look at Ephesians 4:27. It says this: do not give the devil a foothold. Now, what does that mean? It means don't allow the devil anywhere in your life. Any small part, any foothold that he can get in your life, because he wants to establish that. He wants to take over your life. So, for example, we may say, well, this little thing over here, I know it's not good. I know it's a bit of a secret sin. It's something that, well, I give into. It might be a personal habit. It's something that nobody else knows about. It's a private thing with me. Everything else in my life is pretty good. Everything else is fine. Everything else is as it should be. But just this little thing, it's okay. I can deal with that. Sometimes it trips me up. Sometimes it causes me troubles. But I can deal with it. I can sort that out. If you think like that, you are so sadly mistaken. Because do you think Satan is going to be happy with just a foothold in your life? No, he wants to take over the whole of your life. He wants to ruin you. He wants to destroy you. Jesus comes and he says, I've come to give you life, life in abundance, life to the full. And therefore, if you depend on Jesus more and more, then you really live as he wants you to live. Satan wants you to die. Satan wants to destroy your life. Satan wants to destroy everything that you have. He wants you to do evil. He wants you to give in to those temptations. He wants you to do that stuff. So he will try to establish a foothold in your life and take it over little by little by little. Now, what are some of the ways that Satan does that? Well, he comes at our hearts. That's what he does. That's why we need to take care of the condition of our heart. So, for example, any negative emotion Satan can use to have a foothold in your life. So, jealousy can give Satan a foothold in your life. Envy can. Are you envious of other people? Some of us maybe really struggle with that. Lust can be a foothold. Anger can be a foothold. Boredom can be a foothold. All of these negative emotions that can come into your lives where it can become to destroy your life. And then when you mix several of those heart conditions together, they become very potent. So, for example, let's say that one day you are tired, you are frustrated, you are hurt, and you are feeling lonely. That combination right there is setting you up for an amazing way to be tempted. because you feel bad about how you feel, and so therefore it becomes a thing that becomes this powerful combination that can cause you to give in to a temptation. Because what happens is you start feeling bad, and then this little voice inside of you says, I deserve to do that. I'm having a really tough time at the moment. Do you know what? I deserve to do that thing that no one else knows about. I just deserve a little bit of fun. I just deserve to do this little thing. No one knows anything about it. And you start listening to yourself. You know where that's coming from? That's coming from ideas inside of you that are not good. The devil tempting you. And unless you take care of the condition of your heart, you will forever fall into temptation. Number 4, step number 4, is pray for God's help. Pray for God's help. So you talk to him, basically, as you pray for his help. Now, if you're not talking to God on a regular basis, in other words, if you're not spending a good amount of time in prayer on a daily basis, you really have no protection against temptation. That's why Jesus gave this advice to his followers in Matthew 26:41. Keep alert and pray, otherwise temptation will overpower you. In other words, talk to God about those temptations. Because as simple as it is, we often forget to pray. We get so busy, we get so focused on life, we go rushing around all the time, and we just don't stop and pray. And what we ought to learn is what I call microwave prayers. You know these sort of prayers? So when a temptation comes, when there is a problem, where say you suddenly think to yourself, wow, this is coming right at me, those quick prayers, microwave prayers, Lord, help me. In the middle of the temptation, in the middle of the circumstances, pray those quick prayers to God. In fact, God says to us in Psalm 50 verse 15, call to me when trouble comes, I will save you. When trouble comes. No, so that's not a long conversation, but immediately call on him when trouble comes. So for example, let's say you're out on the motorway and the idiot in the next lane really cuts you up. Really cuts you up, and you're really angry, and you think to yourself, right, I'm going to get my own back. At that point, you shouldn't think to yourself, I will add this to my prayer list and my daily devotion tomorrow. You don't do that, do you? That's not going to work. No, you pray at that moment, Lord, help me to have patience. Help me not to be angry about this. And when you do, God answers those prayers. Why should God help me? Because he understands, because he cares. He knows what we go through. Look at this in Hebrews 4, verses 15 and 16. It says, Jesus understands our weaknesses, for he faced all the same temptations that we do, and yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy and grace to help us when we need it. He knows exactly what we go through. He understands. But the difference is that Jesus didn't sin. See, when Jesus was about to die on the cross, as he was there in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was tempted to not do what he was called to do. He prayed in agony. He says, I don't want to face the cross. I don't want to go through all of that torture. And there was a temptation right there not to do what he knew he'd come to do. And yet, he faced that temptation and came through it. And he came through it by praying to God the Father. He was fully human. He was fully God, but he was fully human. Therefore, he knows what we go through. The only difference is that he never sinned. He never gave in to temptation because he is sinless. But because he knows what temptation is, he understands what we go through too. Therefore, we need to be praying to God for his help. Number 5, refocus your attention elsewhere. That's the 5th fill-in. Refocus your attention elsewhere. In other words, change the direction of your thoughts. You refocus on something else. You shift your attention. Look at this in James 1, 14 and 15. Temptation is the pull of your own evil thoughts and wishes. These evil thoughts lead to evil action. So this is what happens, is temptation always starts with a thought. It always starts in your mind. And then what it does is it gets your attention. So there's this physical law that whatever gets your attention, you go towards. So have you ever been driving along the motorway, and all of something gets your attention, and then you begin to veer to the side towards that, don't you? And you say, oh no, I'm coming out my lane here, and you have to come back again. You know, that sort of stuff. Or how about right now? How many of you are feeling hungry? How many of you begin to smell the barbecue that is beginning to be cooked over there? That's got your attention, isn't it? Now your attention's focusing on feeling hungry and the smell of the barbecue as it's starting to waft over perhaps has your attention, and therefore you get drawn towards it. So the more you think about something that is a problem, is a habit or is a temptation, the stronger it can get in your life. So therefore you need to divert your attention. But here's the point here. You cannot do this in your own strength. You don't fight temptation. You cannot fight temptation. You have to therefore divert your attention to something else. Change your thought process. Here's what the Bible says in 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5. It says, we capture every thought and make it obey Christ. Now that is possible, but it takes practice. You cannot control all of your circumstances. You cannot control temptations. They will come at you when you're least ready, when you're least expecting it. You can't control your own emotions. Have you understood that or experienced that? But there is one thing you can control. You can control to choose about what you think about. So therefore you change your thoughts to something else. So, for example, when Jesus was tempted, he was out in the desert one time for 40 days. He was on a fast before he started his ministry. And he was at the end of that time, he was tired, he was hungry. Satan comes to him and Satan tempts him. And he says to him, hey, look, you see all those stones there? Why don't you transform them? Why don't you change them and turn them into bread? And Jesus said, he didn't go, I must resist that hunger, I must resist that hunger, I must resist that hunger. He doesn't do that. What he does is he turns his attention to God's word and to God himself. And he overcomes those temptations. Now, why am I saying this? Do not try to argue with the devil when he tries to tempt you, because you will always lose. So when temptation comes and you see it on your caller ID, temptation, do not pick the phone up. You know when you get a sales call, you don't pick those up, do you? You just ignore those. Or if it says international on there, you think that's a sales call, definitely. You don't pick it up, do you? Unless you want to have a bit of fun with it, but you shouldn't do that. Now what you do is when temptation comes, you don't try and fight it, you ignore it, and then you will weaken it. Look at what Romans 12:21 says. Don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil with good. In other words, fill your mind with truth. Fill your mind with the word of God. Focus on him. And finally, number 6, I must persist in believing I can change. I must persist in believing that I can change. Here's the good news. You do not have to stay the same. Change is possible. It's never too late to start again. See, you may have been falling into a temptation for 10, 15, 20 years. Even as I'm speaking now, you know what that temptation is. There may be people who love you, who deeply care about you, who are on your case about the temptation that you give into. And you may be in denial over that. You may say, no, I can handle it, I'm okay, it's not an issue. And everybody else around you is saying, have a look. You cannot deal with this, you cannot cope with this. This is destroying your life, and it may even be destroying people that you care and who love you. And sometimes we just think, I keep falling into the same temptations, I keep failing again and again and again. And you just think, I can never change. Well, that's not true. Because you can change. God says you can change. But it ain't going to happen with a miracle. Some of us think that we're waiting for this special thing from God. We think it's going to be a miracle. We think it might be some sermon or maybe some sort of seminar or some pill you could take or whatever it might be. And you think that's how God's going to deal with it. That's not going to happen. God doesn't work like that. How does God take away the temptations that we face? Look at this verse in 1 Corinthians 10:13. No temptation has come your way that is beyond, your way is beyond what others have had to face. All you need to remember is that God will never let you down. He'll never let you be pushed past your limit. He'll always be there to help you come through that temptation. And you say, yeah, but Phil, I have messed up so many times in a particular area, a particular temptation. Time and time again, I fall to the same temptation. I just couldn't help it. And you're right, if you're trying to do it in your own strength. That's why you need the Lord Jesus Christ. That's why you need God in your life. Because you don't have enough power. You do not have enough power in your own, enough willpower to deal with the issues that you face. No, you need God's power in your life. You need God's Spirit in your life, because when you have Him as part of your life, you will get over these things. Now, as I finish, I've tried to put those sort of steps in very simple ways. They are simple steps, but they're not easy, are they? Build accountability into your life, set boundaries. Don't put yourself in situations where you know you're going to be tempted. Because here's the thing, given the right situation, you and I, we are capable of anything. 1 Corinthians 10, set 12 says this: if you think you're standing strong, be careful, for you too may fall to the same sin. So if you think temptation is not an issue for me, then watch out, because you will fall. If you think to yourself, this could never happen to me, if you think to yourself, oh, I'll never get tempted with that, you'd be surprised. You'd be so wrong. There's many a person who said, I would never do this, whatever this might be. And they go into situations and they fall flat on their face. And they end up with damage in their life and damage in other people. I wonder what habit, what temptation you face on a continual basis. I wonder what that challenge might be for you. Are you ready to make the change? Not in your own willpower, but are you ready to make that change with God's help? We're going to pray, and I'm going to lead us in a prayer now that you might want to use to just think about this whole area of temptation and how we can make the steps to change. Let me pray. Let's pray together. And you may just want to echo some of these words that I pray. Heavenly Father, you know all the habits and temptations in my life that have tripped me up for years. You know all the tempting situations that I'm facing right now. You even know what temptations lay ahead of me this next week that I don't even know are coming and are going to hit me. So I'm asking for your help. I'm not just asking for a miracle, I'm asking for your strength to take these steps that we've been talking about this morning. I'm willing to follow your principles so I can change and be free. Help me to clearly see the patterns in my life that lead to temptation. Give me enough strength to start avoiding them and build some boundaries in my life that there's certain places I don't go, and there's certain things I don't watch, and there's certain people I don't spend time with. Lord, help me to remember to refocus my attention when things get my attention and tempt me. More importantly, Lord, I need you to do some heart surgery on me. I ask you to remove the negative emotions that make me vulnerable to temptation. Would you replace the discouragement and the exhaustion, or the boredom, or the spiritual dryness and emptiness? Would you replace the insecurity and the deep wounds and hurts in my heart? Would you replace the resentment, the anger, the sadness, the loneliness with your love, with your forgiveness, with your confidence? I want to learn to trust you. So I ask you, Jesus Christ, to start changing me from inside, beginning today. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.